When it comes to remakes, especially live action remakes based on animated movies or shows, I find them as valuable as a broken pencil. Pointless. Pulling on the heartstrings of nostalgia and cashing in on what's already familiar and forcing them into a live action environment, making them spout pop culture references while also having the inevitable fart joke or toilet humour in there, or having a general disregard for the source material to the point of it being disrespectful to the viewers and the legacy the franchise once had, or forcing characters into a 3D animated format which completely disregards the very nature and charm the character had in the first place, or rushing through vital plot points, not giving the characters time to think or invest in the moment. Now, different adaptations and reiterations are fine if you are going to let the story and characters grow so they fit their new environment and setting while still being the same characters we remember, but how many of these live action remakes actually do that? The Smurfs, a fantasy series from the 80s, was forced into a metropolitan setting. Why? The Chipmunks, a music band created in the 50s and the 60s, forced into the modern era where their music is annoying and unoriginal, at least to me. Scooby-Doo forced into a real-life monster story instead of a mystery disproving the existence of monsters and thus nullifying the fears children have of monsters in the first place. Garfield, Yogi Bear, Woody Woodpecker, I could go on. The only live-action remake I can think of that was actually successful in my opinion was 101 Dalmatians, where the dogs for the most part were real dogs who didn't talk. So when another remake of a 2D classic is announced to be a live-action CG hybrid, you know exactly what to expect, and it's usually to be disappointed. Now, I know it's unfair of anybody to judge a movie before actually seeing it, but after I saw the trailers for the new live-action CGI hybrid remake for Peter Rabbit, I felt like chasing after the film with a rake, shaking my fist in the air while yelling, "Get off my property or I'll bake you into a pie!" When you make a movie based on a treasure tale that has a legacy of over 115 years and change so much of the story and the characters and the setting that it's unrecognisable, it's a whole new creation. Now, this may be appealing to a modern audience, but I have to ask if the changes made were for that exact reason, to appeal to a modern audience, instead of making the story more relevant to modern culture. And yes, there is a difference there. A good example would be changing the time setting of the remake of It to the 80s instead of the 50s. It's more relevant to modern culture, but the characters stayed more or less the same. Moving the setting of Peter Rabbit from Edwardian times to modern day was a bold move and would have worked if the characters didn't twerk or talk like twats after a night out. This is a movie made for children, right? The Tale of Peter Rabbit is a timeless classic, one of the most treasured pieces of literature in history. Beatrix Potter is one of my heroes, not because of her literary success with her books, and not only were these books independently published, by the way, after being rejected from mainstream publishers, purely because they were children's stories written by a woman, and not only is Peter Rabbit the first literary character to be patented in history, but that the very first time any character was patented was done by a woman in her late 40s in Edwardian times. She wrote, illustrated and published 30 books in her time, and they continue to sell throughout the world in many languages, with her stories being retold in song, film, ballet, animation, and her life depicted in a feature film and television film. Beatrix Potter was a woman ahead of her time. She adored nature and had an incredibly creative imagination. At first glance, her stories are about charming sentiment and cute, precious little animals, but they're actually very lively tales about determination, independence, and defiance. They're about temptation, accountability, and loyalty. They depict joy, tragedy, cruelty, without worrying about how children may react. They respected the intelligence of children, unlike most of the tripe made today. I know yet again I sound like a stuck-up elitist cow and that I should lighten up. It's a children's movie, right? It doesn't matter. Who cares if Peter Rabbit, a simple Edwardian child character, is upgraded to thoughtlessly injuring some birds, or grabbing a pile of lettuce leaves and making it rain like a banker in a strip club, or literally twerking? Who cares if Mr. McGregor's garden is no longer a place that animals fear to tread, losing all tension and dread that the original story had? Who cares if it's the place place where Peter Rabbit's father was killed. Let's make it so that all the animals are in the garden without a care in the world, and ignore the laws of nature, and have Peter happy to see Mr. Todd, a fox who in the series was a sophisticated trickster reduced to a streaker. Who cares? It's going to keep my kids occupied, so who cares how much of a car crash this movie is? Peter Rabbit setting up bear traps, electrocuting Mr. McGregor's nephew. This is Peter Rabbit, right? You sure it's not Saw with Jigsaw being a rabbit instead of a puppet? Seriously, why does this thing exist? How in any way does this movie respect the laws of nature while staying true to life? Beatrix Potter appreciated the beauty of nature while also respecting its ruthlessness. She stays true to life and the laws of nature, which is why her stories are timeless. This movie will not, and I am certain Beatrix herself would never have allowed this to happen in the first place. The sad thing is that this movie will now drown out the animated shorts that were made in the early 90s that did successfully portray the work of Beatrix Potter. Lost in obscurity, this series was a childhood favourite of mine. It has charm, simplicity, sophistication, but was also disturbing and scary when it needed to be. Celebrating 100 years of Beatrix Potter, these animated shorts were released in 1993 by the same pioneers of the animation behind The Snowman. This animation technique is called rendered artwork, a process that allows the original Potter watercolours to be translated with stunning faithfulness into film. The first animated short is a splice of two stories, Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny. A good children's story usually has these elements in it: forbidden territory, fretting parents, the irrepressible child, the terrifying encounters and breathless chases, then the safety of family and the lessons learned. This is what Peter Rabbit is and should be. Even the CGI animated series, which differed from this series, still held some truth to the source material. Is this new movie a parody? I sure hope so, because I'm horrified that when people say Peter Rabbit, there will be some people who will think of this instead of this. I know the old saying goes, there's no such thing as a bad idea, but there is such a thing as a bad execution of an idea. And I think this is the perfect example of an idea badly executed. Please give this series a watch instead. It's beautiful. I'm Mad Munchkin. Stay creative.